struggle. There's a difference between Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving. What do you do in the culture of your family to actually give thanks during the feast? We're going to have an interactive time. I'm going to ask you for what your family does, because here are some of the failures. Like we do the traditional thing. We'll all stand and hold hands and pray and thank the Lord for each other and thank the Lord for the food and thank the Lord for the Lord Jesus. And then we sit down and we tear into a gluttonous feast. And it's great, but it's, that's not a whole lot unlike what we normally do. We normally pray over our meals, holding hands in our house. So it's like, oh, it's just a lot more people. There's the perpetual failure one. You herd everybody to the table. You get all 22, 29, 40 people around the table. All the food descends on the table, ready to go and hot. And somebody makes this ridiculous idea, gives this idea. How about we all go around and say one thing we're thankful for, and you can't repeat what someone else has said. So if you're early, you say something about freedom, country, pilgrims, Turkey, family, loved ones, and then you have to start thinking. By the time it gets to the last person, sarcastically they say, I thank God that we have a microwave to warm up the food that used to be hot when we started this thing. So since we don't have kids for children's home, can we steal ideas from one another? Does anybody say, hey, no, we found something in our house that really works to give thanks at Thanksgiving? Anybody have one of those? We have a roving microphone that will descend to you. Wait for the microphone, because this is going to be good. Say, who says prayer?
She asked one person to say the prayer.
One person to say the prayer. Okay. All right. Bummer. Mom's working on Thanksgiving. We're not going to give thanks, let alone have food.
Well, I think I did it now.
Gotcha. Does somebody have anything that they say, no, we've got it down. We've figured out something that works. Anybody?
I have something we're doing this year.
All right, we'll wait for the microphone.
I don't know if it works or not. We'll see. This is not my idea. This is my daughter's idea. Ashley's birthday was the 30th of October. And she said, Mom, I don't want anything for my birthday. She said, I have plans. I'm like, okay, what's going on? So she had us all draw names. We put every family member's name in a sack and drew names. And we're like, okay, what do we do with it now? And she asked us all to write a letter of thanksgiving and admiration to that one person, and then we're sharing that on Thanksgiving with each other.
Oh, I like that one.
It was good, but I didn't think about it.
No, the best ideas are rarely original. It's almost always a pilot, Just steal it. That's a good one. I wish I would have thought of that on October 30th. That's a really good one. Anybody else? I asked my students this question too, and out of 90 students, I got one good suggestion. A lot of the ones that don't work, like letting food get cold. Same kind of thing. Basket of little pieces of paper for the week, 2 weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, and you just go write what you're thankful for, and then they have a little metal tree with clips on it, and you just put it on the tree, and then you just kind of ignore it, and then it becomes the centerpiece at Thanksgiving, and things are read off the tree at that point, once everyone already has their food. If you think of any ideas, Christmas celebrations that are meaningful that work for you, Thanksgiving, I am always one to steal ideas. Okay, time for a quiz. Repetition is the key to understanding. What's the repeated message in that song, congregation?
His love endures forever.
Yeah, that's the easy answer, and it's the right answer, but did you notice that was your part? What was the repeated message in my part? Let me just give you a little bit of it. I'll pick a number, verse 10. Let me just read verse 10 and don't interrupt me, please. To him who struck down the firstborn of Egypt and brought Israel out from among them with a mighty hand and outstretched arm. And to him who divided the Red Sea asunder and brought Israel through the midst of it and swept Pharaoh and his army into the Red Sea. To him who led his people through the desert, who struck down great kings and killed mighty King Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of Bashan, and gave their land as an inheritance to his servant Israel. Have I read enough that you know what's being repeated there? What is that? What is it? What?
The people being led out of Egypt.
Yeah, which in the last, if you've been around here the last 2 months, what is that? That's the Jesus story of Israel. Can I make a connection for you that God made for me this past week? Woven throughout your Jesus story is God's love. Woven throughout your Jesus story is God's love. This is absolutely incredible. I'm trying so hard in my preparation for Thanksgiving. I'm trying to come up with an idea for my family. Because I want our time of Thanksgiving not to just be a great time of feasting and family coming together. It's going to be a great time. But I want it to be a time of thanksgiving, where we actually give thanks to the Lord because His love endures forever. I haven't found the method yet, and Lord, I love that one. Just wish I would have had it 3 or 4 weeks ago to do. I like that when I wrote that one down. But I want our time of Thanksgiving to be more than just this traditional time of feasting. And so I haven't come up with my method on how I'm going to do that yet. But I will tell you this in my personal life. I've spent more time in personal preparation in advance of Thanksgiving this year than any year before. And the way I did it, I'm a simple person. I opened up my concordance at the back of my Bible, and I wrote down every verse, every reference that had the word thanks in it in the book of Psalms. Wrote it down on a Post-it note, and I put it on the front of my Bible, and every morning I'm just going through and I'm reading these verses, and I'm trying to glean something about, all right, what is it that I can do to be ready for Thanksgiving? And I haven't come up with the method for my whole family, but I can't get away from Psalm 136. I love how it starts. This repeated line is love endures forever, but I love how it starts. The revelation in the first 3 verses. You didn't close your Bibles, did you? Good. Psalm 136, the revelation in the first 3 verses about who God is, gives me cause to be thankful. In essence, verse 1. God is good. And God is the God of gods, and God is the Lord of lords. Let's get that one down. God is so good. And then you get down to verses 4 through 9, and this God who is essentially good, at his very center he is good, at his very nature he is good, and in his motivation he is good. That same God, verses 4 through 9, it was telling the story of creation. God who can stand on the edge of nothingness and create. And he can create land, and he can tell the ocean where to stop, that's a shore, and it can't violate the shoreline. And God who can put stars in the sky, and other places in Scripture we know he knows those stars by name. So I put those two together. This God who is good, who has the power to create a universe. And then in verse 10 he starts into the Jesus story. And I started looking at the Jesus story of Israel, a story that I and you know really well because we grew up in Sunday school. We had the flannel graph board. We remember all these stories. But look at this one. When you get down to verses 10 and 11, it's talking about when Israel is in Egypt and they're slaves in Egypt. And you get down to verse 13, and now Israel has been delivered from Egypt. You remember this story? Israel, they're slaves to the Egyptian nation. And Moses comes in and says, let my people go, God says. And then the plagues come in, and Pharaoh says, get your people out of here. After enough plagues, Pharaoh says, get your people out of there. Here's some traveling gold. Here's a bunch of sheep and donkeys and camels, and get out of here. And they chase Israel out, and Israel leaves. They are now a liberated people. They get about 3 days down the road, and Pharaoh finally wakes up and goes, what did I do? I just gave away my workforce. I just gave away all my free labor. And so he commands his army to go after Israel. So Israel has this 3-day head start, and they're out in the desert, and they're just about to the edge of the Red Sea. So now the Red Sea is right here, and here comes the Egyptian army. Oh no. They have their backs up against the wall. They have the ocean over here. They have an army coming to attack them over here. And they cry out to God. And what does God do? God goes, okay, this isn't a problem for me. I created this sea. I can divide the Red Sea. And you remember this story from Sunday school. And so, boom, the sea divides into 2 oceans. The ground in between is completely dry, and Israel crosses over. Pharaoh catches up with his horses and his chariots and his army, and he goes, it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. And he rides down in that dry ocean bed, and God goes, no, I only have room for 1. Boom, and the sea comes back together, and Pharaoh and his entire army is destroyed. there anything there for you and me? Well, I've never been chased by an enemy before, unless we would call the Oakwood police during the toilet paper thing an army. That's a story for a different day, and we're not going to get into that, and I got away. But I've never been chased by an army, not a literal army. I've never been chased by my enemies. I don't have to run from people, and I certainly don't have enemies that have horses and chariots. I've never been to the Middle East and don't really care to go because it's a dangerous part of the world. I've never touched the Red Sea. I've never been in Egypt. So I can't relate to this, right? Wrong. I've had my back up against the wall too. Where the options look like there are no options here. I talked to a teacher this week. Being Christian doesn't pay well. That's just kind of part of private education is we are privately funded. We don't have tax funding, and so they don't pay well. And I talked to one of my co-workers. His kids are young. They're little ones. And he was given a prayer request about how they didn't have grocery money until the end of the month. And this was on November 13th, he was telling me this. And I said, look, Joe, whoa, what? What did you just say? You guys are out of grocery money, and it's November 13th. How are you going to make it? I remember those days. I had 4 little kids on the DC salary. I remember those days. I remember having my back up against the wall and not knowing how I was going to make the monthly budget work. I remember those days. It's not Egyptian, it's not chariots and horses, but I remember having my back up against the wall saying, God, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this mess. I've been in a relationship crisis before, where I didn't know if the relationship was going to work out, if we were going to navigate through the trouble. I'm not talking about my marriage, I'm talking about my brother. I didn't know if we were going to be able to navigate with our backs up against the wall and the angry army coming so quickly. I can relate to that. We've all been in hospital waiting rooms where the doctor just came in and gave a diagnosis you did not want to hear. Your back is up against the wall, and the army of illness is coming at you fast. Yeah, they're not Egyptians, they're not chariots, they're not horses, it's not Pharaoh, it's not the Red Sea, but we've all had ourselves with our back against the wall at the funeral home, and the grief coming in so hard that it's taking you out at the knees. And where is God in the middle of that? What was your mind over and over again? His love endures forever when you have your back up against the wall. And you don't know how you're going to make it through. And his love endures forever. But I kept reading in Israel's Jesus story, and I got down to verse, it kind of transitions from the exile. Now Israel's out there, and they're in the desert, right? And they're in the desert. You get down to verse 15. Pharaoh swept, but God swept Pharaoh and his army into the Red Sea. Verse 16, to him who led his people through the desert. Oh, another Sunday school lesson. You remember that one? So Israel decides they want to make a gold calf, and God's kind of ticked about that. And he goes, fine. You want a gold calf instead of worshiping me? You want to worship an object? You guys can just wander in the desert for 40 years until all of you die out, and then we'll take the young generation into the promised land. You guys are in 40 years of punishment. Hey, wait a minute. 40 years of punishment? That story. Do you remember that God at least still was with them and he led them, a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night? God still led them even through their disobedience. And God was still giving them manna every day. Look, I don't know what manna is. I don't know what it tastes like. But 40 years? I mean, you can give me Marion's Pizza, and I love Marion's Pizza. I do not want it for every meal for the next 40 years. So no matter how good it was 40 years of that, but it was 40 years. Why? Because it was a consequence to their own behavior. In the middle of verse 16, actually at the end of verse 16, in the middle of 40 years of punishment, in the middle of when it was their fault, it was their consequence for their wrongful action. What was your line? Say it, congregation. Oh my goodness. Even when I caused the problem, his love endures forever. Even when I brought this on myself, his love endures forever. Part of your Jesus story is this. We live out consequences. Sure we do. That's the way God set up his universe. You sin, you pay consequences. You love God, you have consequences. But the consequences are different for sinning consequences and loving God consequences. But we live out consequences of our own making. And even in the middle of our consequence, his love endures forever. You keep reading. I mean, he's not done yet. Now, 40 years pass, and the rest of the psalm is about, and God helped you conquer your enemies. And I love this. Verse 15, who struck down great kings. Verse 18, about 17. 18, and killed mighty kings. Then he mentions to Sion and Og, and gave their land as an inheritance to his servant Israel. Time out right there. Do you see what just happened? Israel got an inheritance from their enemies. Israel got an inheritance from their enemies. When Israel goes into the promised land, God says, all right, I want you to walk in there, and I'm going to help you defeat these people. And then I'm going to turn around, and I'm going to give you their cities. And you're going to live in cities that you did not build. And I'm going to, don't destroy the vines. No. Because I'm going to let you eat off the grapevines that your enemies planted. This is so classically God. What God does is, he will give us as an inheritance things that used to dog us. And I asked myself the question this week. God routinely turns bad into good. He brings dawn out of darkness. He brings redemption out of punishment. He brings inheritance out of the bankruptcy of our enemies. Have I ever seen that happen in my life? Has God ever done that in my life where he actually gives me something good, but it didn't start good, it started bad, and the answer is resoundingly yes. I struggle with lousy priorities. I inherited lousy priorities. My dad and mom were so involved in ministry that, well, they didn't have a lot of time for their kids. I mean, I never played Little League Baseball because there was nobody taking to the Little League Baseball park because they were working with somebody else's kids at the church. And I grew up in that priorities of ministry versus family. And it's out of the bad part, and I learned them well. Oh my goodness. I neglected my family so badly for the first 10 years of my teaching career, but I was the best teacher in the building. And then it dawned on me. My family's going to be my family long after my students have forgotten my name. I need to change my priorities. You see what God just did there? He taught me good priorities out of my own bad priorities. He taught me to really think through the badness of what I had done, and that brought forth the goodness. How about a different area where it's happened in me? Maybe this has happened in you. I think I have one of the strongest marriages of anybody I know. My wife and I are relentless in our fighting against things that lead to separation and divorce. We won't even use the word divorce. We won't practice any of the habits of divorce, like when you get mad, you walk out of the room. When you get mad, you stick it out and you work it out, right? And we just won't do anything. Do you know why? Because in 1968, when my wife was the fourth born of 4 girls and a 6-year-old, her dad walked away. And she dealt with an entire lifetime of growing up without a dad. She is the product of a broken home. And in 1968, people didn't walk away from their commitments like they do so readily today. And so our reaction to that pain that she grew up with is we will do everything we can to build the walls thick and high against anything that would threaten our marital union. God just brought goodness out of that. It's painful growing up brings resolve in the next generation. How about this one? I had to admit to my students, I've been playing with them for weeks now about what I got on the ACT. It makes me laugh what I got on the ACT. I don't know how tuned in you are to the ACT scores, but if you're not in the mid-20s, you're not going to college. And I just grin, because I know what I got. And I teach the highest level of students at Dayton Christian in the English department. I teach advanced placement English to kids who are a whole lot smarter than I am. So I've been playing with them all year long about, I don't know, I think you guys can do this. I mean, after all, I know what I got on the ACT, and it's a lot lower than your lowest score. Where'd you get this, Chris? I'm not telling. I'll tell you in May, when it's too late for you to transfer to Springboro or Centerville. I told them this week, I just had a weak moment. I said, I got to tell you guys something. I got a 16 on my ACT. Oh my goodness, I had 3 faces go. That's really bad. But you know what? What'd you say? That's good. Yeah. No, you know what God has brought out of that? I have such a compassion to students who do not have as much grade matter as their peers, but they do have a work ethic, because that's my story. There's just not a whole lot going on up there, but I work hard, I study hard, I memorize hard. It takes me longer than anybody I know, but I now have compassion for weak students because I got a 16 on my ACT. Over and over and over again. When I explored, God, how do you bring inheritance from the enemies? How do you do that in the modern? I know you did it in Israel's Jesus story, but how do you do it in my Jesus story? And the reality is, now that I know what grief feels like, having gone through it 2 years ago with a brother-in-law that passed away, my heart breaks for people who go through grief because I've been there. God has given an inheritance out of pain. God has given light out of darkness. Look, I'll tell you the truth. I have no idea what I'm going to do with my family on Thursday to make Thanksgiving a time of giving thanks, not just having thanks. I have no idea what my method will be. But I do know this here, that I worship a God who in his very essence, Psalm 136, is good. And I worship a God who in his very essence is so powerful that it can stand on nothing, surrounded by nothing, and can create a universe out of nothing. And I worship a God who, whether the consequences are my fault, or whether I have my back to the wall, not my fault, or whether I am surrounded by darkness, the one thing that ties it all together is his love endures forever. How can I personally not give thanks on Thanksgiving when that's the God bless? May God add his blessing